o'clock on Sunday morning, and there were periodic demonstrations throughout the city. I was in touch, and it really looked like things were going very, very well, as best as could be expected. I think the crowds got up to, and Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, close to 3,000 people at one point. And but even then, with the big crowds, things were progressing peacefully. And then around 8:15 on Sunday evening, I get a call from the chief, and he says things are deteriorating. The situation is deteriorating rapidly. He said, we are literally under attack, with rocks are being thrown at us and bottles. I need you to impose a curfew. And so we agreed upon the time. I got the city attorney on the phone. We drew up the necessary paperwork, and there we were. Again, from 11 o'clock to roughly 8 o'clock, 8 p.m., 7 or 8 hours, if my math is correct, maybe 8 or 9 hours, we had peaceful demonstrations in our city. After that, it went to hell. And, you know, in other parts of the city, particularly the Palm Beach Lakes corridor, we had rocks being thrown at windows and buildings. I think Target, TD Bank, Best Buy. There was a vehicle that was set on fire. It really deteriorated quite rapidly. So now, having said all that, that was Sunday. We got through that. I took a tour of the affected areas on Monday morning, and we had demonstrations pretty much the rest of the week. Now, what doesn't get told is that those demonstrations were all peaceful. I think we may have had, over the course of a week, maybe a week, 10 days, Chief, we had more than 4,000 people total demonstrating throughout our city. I think we had 9 protests throughout the week. We only had 8 arrests, and with the exception of the incidents on Sunday night, we had no further damage to person or property. So that's kind of my perspective on it. I'd like to turn it over to the chief now, and he could probably dig a little deeper. And Chief, and you can also talk about how you, not specifics, but how you come to get information about when demonstrations are planned and et cetera. So if you don't mind speaking from your perspective on what happened.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And again, thank the Chamber for allowing us to be here today and participate in this discussion. So, you know, it's a Sunday, and everything kind of started out very peaceful. And as the Mayor said, our job at that time was to create a peaceful environment for the people that were interested in having a peaceful protest. So that entailed bringing in a number of officers that their job were to block the roadways, make sure we didn't have any issues with traffic, redirect traffic for people traveling throughout cities so they don't get stuck in traffic jams, and try to get them through the city so they can reach their destinations. The 8+ hours of peaceful demonstration, I saw a number of people in that group that were residents here of West Palm Beach, and very thankful for our service throughout that 8 hours, and they had an opportunity to voice their concern and have their voice be heard in a very peaceful manner. I think at around 7:30 is when this thing kind of changed, because you have a lot of people that's not like the people that here to now that have this discussion, that have a special interest in our city and the stakeholders here in the city. You got people that travel from other cities to come to our city, and you know, when it comes down to the outlet mall and, you know, breaking windows in Target and trying to loot Target, I mean, those are people that they don't realize, you know, next week they're not going to have a need to go to Target like everyone else here. We don't want to lose our Target, and the residents of West Palm Beach don't really want to lose their Target, especially at a time where we need to be getting prepared for hurricane season, places like Target to help us do that. And we were kind of thankful at that minute because, you know, we had, 3 large groups downtown and 2 large groups downtown, and this third, a group that mostly from out of our city, non-residents, were trying to attack the outlet mall. Thankful we were able to, through our mutual aid agreement, utilize the resources from Riviera Beach and Palm Beach Gardens Police Department to help us maintain control of that. I think the big point here is everybody know what the topic is. It's a topic of police reform, and I think if you look at the mayor's administration and what we've done in the past year, that's what you have here in West Palm Beach, police reform. To me, I think police reform is how do you make things better? You know, I wake up in the morning and I say, how do we make it better? What is the things that we can change to make it better? And that's part of the reform. And we are an accredited police department, and part of that standard is we have to review all of our policies and procedures on an annual basis. And we're looking to utilize best practices here in our city, and we have a total independent group out of Tallahassee, which is managed by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, that says the West Palm Beach Police Department is doing it right. So I think that as we further these discussions and people have concerns, whether it's an internal investigation in our city or some type of incident that's involving the West Palm Beach Police Department, I've left my door open and I'm welcoming these discussions. And I've had several in the last years. And what I kind of find out is there's a lot of people that just don't have the right information, but they're upset about things that they were told were done a certain way, but did not have all the information. And I think this is part of the how do we move forward. I think communications is a very big piece of it. I think we need to all come together and have these discussions. A lot of people from their perceptions, to them it's a true reality. But if they're not really truly informed, they have a perspective on the information, and therefore they're not making a very clear decision on their beliefs on what actually took place because they don't have all the information. So, I think, we're here, we're talking to people, the business community. I just want you to know that, we're here to protect our city and your interests in making our city a safe city. And I think that we have clearly demonstrated that over the last couple of weeks here with these challenges dealing with people who, in some videos we've already captured, where people say, protest first, riot later.
And let me give you a little bit of a perspective as the mayor, because when word of these demonstrations started coming into my office and we were preparing, there was a balancing act that I have. Obviously, I need to protect my citizens. I need to protect businesses, property in the city. But frankly, I need to protect the demonstrators and their right to exercise their First Amendment rights. To give you an idea of how we've been over backwards to accommodate the demonstrators, I don't know if you recall, but we got word that they wanted to shut down 95. And we were proactive, working with the FHP, Florida Highway Patrol, Sheriff's Department, rather than risking demonstrators running out into traffic and maybe someone get hit by a car or maybe a car with, citizens or family in it getting attacked. The chief and law enforcement made the decision to just shut off 95, I think, between Palm Beach Lakes and Southern for a period of time. And they let the demonstrators go out there, do their thing for, maybe an hour, hour and a half. They were able to accomplish whatever goal they wanted to accomplish in terms of shutting down 95. but it was done in a peaceful, safe manner. So the planning that went into accommodating the interests of the demonstrators, I thought was significant. And so as the mayor, understanding what was going to happen on Sunday, going into Sunday, I felt pretty good about where we were. But things did deteriorate after a number of hours. So that is my view as the mayor, is that how do I balance the competing interests? We certainly don't want to have cars on fire, stores looted, et cetera, but we wanted to accommodate. And I think for the most part, we were able to do that. So I did want to just jump in with that. I'm very proud of the job that our police department did and continues to do. Now, I'm not here dancing in the end zone. The chief is not dancing in the end zone. We understand that these demonstrations will continue for a period of time because things are happening. You know, when we set this meeting up, as Rick alluded to, we had no idea what was going to happen in Atlanta on Friday night, which has sparked a whole another series of anger and frustration. People are tired. I get that. But if nothing else, I think what, at this period of time, and I call it an inflection point, it is hopefully triggering the need for honest, candid, open conversations in our community. Shameless plug, I'm hosting a virtual town hall tomorrow night at 5 p.m. Chief will be there, Rick will be there, Congresswoman Lois Frankel, and some others. Is a first step to start engaging the community in dialogue as to how do we move forward as a community, how do we heal, how do we progress. So that's all. Do we have some questions? I don't know if anybody else wants to say anything. Do we have any questions that are coming up?
No, Chief, Mayor.
Chief, anything else you want to say?
We've got some questions. We do have some questions coming up. Don, can you scroll a little bit so we can get the first question? You're able to read it from there? Yeah. I have my super duper Darryl Neer. This is from Darryl Neer. Having been in a prosecutor's office in New Jersey for 20 years, in New Jersey, then in private practice before moving to Florida 15 years ago, I thank you for your service. While peaceful protests are our rights as citizens of this great country, looters and criminals should be arrested. They take away from the message. I don't agree with defunding law enforcement. I do feel that community policing has proven to work. What is the police department doing to enhance your programs?
Let me address the defunding the police issue first. I don't know if any of you saw, I had an occasion to speak to Michael Williams on To The Point yesterday, and that was the first question that he asked me. I do not, and I'll make this very clear, I do not support defunding the police as it may sound. And I mentioned, I think there's a semantics problem there. I don't, as you drill down deeper into the conversation, I don't think that they are saying don't have police departments, because I certainly am not in favor of that. Two elements. One is, can you redefine the scope of work that our police department is doing? And maybe take homelessness off of their plate, maybe take mental health treatment off of their plate. There's no reason why the largest mental health hospital in a county or in a community should be our prisons or our jails. That just isn't right. And the police should not be the ones who are on first call when you're dealing with a homelessness situation. So as we begin to look at some of the ills that our city suffers from, we need to be sensitive to the fact that we need armed policemen to go out and deal with every one of those situations, and I would say probably not, and I'm proud that West Palm Beach has invested in the homelessness situation, and we put mental health advocates on the street, et cetera, and we will have to continue to look for that. So, no, I'm not in favor of defunding the police. I'm in favor of looking at the portfolio of responsibility that our police department has and looking if we can lighten that load and move that over to folks who don't need to carry a gun and a badge. Yes. And then I think it's also a matter of reallocating funds. And are there some dollars should we spend more dollars on fighting homelessness out of the city budget and more dollars on economic development, et cetera? Each department, and we're in the middle of budget season now, we look at each department very carefully to see how we can pursue our strategic plan. So that addresses the defunding the police issue. I'm not in favor of that. When I go into communities throughout our city, and particularly communities of color, some of the people who are crying loudest for more police in their communities are those who live in some of these underserved communities. They understand the value of having police weed out the bad actors in their communities. They don't want to have their little kids playing in the front yard and witnessing open-air drug sales across the street. They don't want the little kids playing in the front yard and have to risk getting shot by a stray bullet because of violence. So those communities understand the need for police. Now, the perception has to change where the police are seen as allies in the battle for our streets and not adversaries. And I think that, unfortunately, that's kind of the, in other cities, fortunately, and knock on wood, we won't have, that's the perception now, is that the police are adversaries to the community and not allies with the community. And we are working hard and have been working hard to avoid that. Chief, do you want to talk about some of the policies that we have adopted? And I know you don't like bragging about what we have because there's always a risk, but I'll leave it to you.
Well, I think if you look at the policies and procedures in the West Palm Beach Police Department, as I indicated earlier, we're an accredited agency by the state of Florida, which is governed by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. I think one of the things we need to do here is to educate the public as to what these policies are. If you say, well, you know, the West Palm Beach Police Department has bad policies, and then you say, and the question is, well, can you tell me the one that you have the issue with? No one really knows what that is, and we can't even have that discussion. So one of the things that we're looking to do is have our policies posted on our webpage so that people can read them, so that they can actually be in a discussion to say, well, I read your use of force policy and I don't agree with this part of it. That then gives us an opportunity to engage in a discussion as to why you feel that way. And, you know, it's certain things that I think the public kind of need to know. And now that use of force is definitely a main topic here. You know, law enforcement is governed by the Supreme Court decision in Graham-Connor, and it's split in three phases. It's the severity of a crime, the suspect's level of resistance, and their ability to escape. So when you look at police departments' use of force policies, they have to address those three areas. And when you look at these incidents, I mean, you look at the incident where, you know, you have a handcuffed person that's lying on the ground and the officer's knee is at his neck, that's cutting off his ability to breathe. What's the crime? Well, it doesn't really matter because he's handcuffed. His ability to, his level of resistance, well, the guy is half dead because you took his oxygen away from him, and he definitely can't escape. So that's how it measures, you know, the level of force being used by the police, and, you know, and it's clear in that Supreme Court decision. And, you know, when people say, well, what are the policies here that you changed? Well, we've changed a lot of them since a year. We have, by being an accredited agency, we have to review all of the policies within our agency on an annual basis.
Who issues that accreditation?
That is from the Florida Accreditation Commission, which is, you know, under the guidance of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. So they determine if an agency in the state has earned the accreditation status, and we have that here in the city of West Palm Beach.
And very briefly, you know, since this There is a movement afoot, hashtag 8can'twait. There are a list of 8 recommendations, and I'm pleased to say that we've identified that the policies we've adopted cover all of those, such as banning chokeholds and strangleholds, mandatory de-escalation training, requiring warnings before shooting, requiring the exhaustion of all means before shooting, imposing a duty to intervene, banning shooting at moving vehicles, implementation of a use of force continuum, and requiring that all uses of force be reported. So those are 8 policies that, different activists are saying local police departments should have, and I'm proud to say we do have those in place already. Okay, there's some more questions?
From Celicia Smith-Gordon. Chief and Mayor, have each of you identified any police policies you champion to change or make better? If so, what are those which will give our communities, especially the Black community, comfort?
Well, 8 can't wait.
Yeah.
We were doing 8 can't wait before that even became a slogan.
Okay. Jennifer O'Flannery Anderson, a good point, would be helpful to know the policies you want to change so that we can help champion those. And I would echo, if there isn't anything like right this second or whatever, I think the idea is the chamber would be, very happy to work with you guys as, championing anything that you think needs to be done, or communicating to the community, stuff like you say. People may not realize that we have already have these policies in place.
Right. And by the way, I failed to mention that we recently established the first use of force review board that has ever been here that the police department has ever had.
Okay. Again, from Celicia Smith-Gordon again. Lisa, you're butting in line, but that's okay. Have you identified any funds currently budgeted to the West Palm Beach Police Department that can be redirected and reinvested into the community for social, civic, and educational needs, perhaps for investment into PAL and Northwest Community Consortium? Would the City and West Palm Beach Police Department consider promoting Citizens Review Board for police actions? And I know, just from my standpoint, also being on the DDA, the DDA is very active in supporting PAL and all of that.
And we do offer money for PAL. What I don't like about the question is, I'm not necessarily taking dollars from the West Palm Beach Police Department and putting in another and redirecting them. To me, each department stands on its own, whether it's the utilities, engineering, housing, community development. What we are looking for is to make sure we have sufficient resources where that department can accomplish their goals and objectives. Now, as I mentioned earlier, is there a need to direct monies for more social, economic development purposes? Absolutely. But actually, part of the police budget is the PAL program. So it's not a redirection, it's a reassessment not only of just the police department budget, but the entire city budget and all the departments, recognizing that we need to put more priority on some of these social programs to make more of an investment as a city. And then I think it's also important to understand that we are trying to redefine the scope of work that our police department is involved in. Chief, do you want to speak to the Citizens Review Board part of that?
Yes, and I speak from my experience in Fort Lauderdale. I believe the creation of the Citizens Review Board, it was, a lot of people felt that it was going to give this group of citizens the authority to investigate police misconduct, and that's simply not the case. I mean, that's not something that we could just do here in the city of West Palm Beach when you have a legislation that create the Police Bill of Rights, and there's a process in place when an officer is being investigated. Now, can you have some people come together and give some recommendation to the mayor and the city administrator ultimately makes the decision if someone's going to get suspended or be terminated from their employment. When you actually look at it, I mean, the police department, and I'm the person that actually makes the recommendation, is making a recommendation. Once that leaves the police department, you know, it goes to our HR department, our city administrator, and the mayor are the ones that actually makes the ultimate decision there. So it ain't like, you know, the police are the ones that actually are governing themselves. I mean, there is currently some oversight here from individuals that are, you know, independent of the police investigation that is being conducted by either the Office of Internal Affairs, or if it's a criminal investigation, you know, you have the state attorney that he's the only person in this county that determines if a crime is going to be prosecuted or not. It's not something that the police makes those decisions on. I think that debate on the citizens review boards, I think, is one that needs to go to Tallahassee, and they need to change and give them what they're actually asking for, because there's no way that we can do that here in the city. It can be a board to make some recommendation, but they can't have subpoena powers and conduct investigation, and it's based on the current structure in the legislature.
Okay.
We have a question from John Bowers. Chief Adderley and Mayor James, thank you for volunteering to host this meeting. Adverse enforcement of laws against black citizens and the use of force by specific police officers has long been a contentious issue. As black men leading a police force and a city, respectively, what impact do the protests have on you personally and professionally? Is diversity in the police force lacking? Finally, do you feel that your race provides you an opportunity to be more impactful in guiding the conversations our communities need to have? That's 4 questions.
4 questions.
John.
But let me just say this, and I kind of understand the nature of the question. I can tell you right now, very few people have been harassed by the police more than me. I mean, I am one of these individuals, for some reason, on my spare time, they're the ones that pick me out. And then they find out that I'm a police officer, and then the whole conversation sort of changed. But how do we get to that point in that discussion is, you know, as a person that's been in this profession for almost 40 years, there was absolutely no basis to get me there other than the fact that I'm a black male. So I recognize this. When people come in and say, hey, listen, I've been mistreated by the police, and I feel it's a race issue, they have my attention, because that has personally happened to me. Here's where the way I look at these things are, we have to get all the information and make informed decisions on how we're going to respond to those type of complaints. And we can't just say, you know, have our minds made up before we look at the facts. We have to focus on the facts and come up with logical evaluation of those facts, and then be able to make informed decisions on them. And treat everybody fair. And for some people, unfortunately, it's very difficult, but for me, I really don't have a problem with it. I mean, you know, people bring cases to me and they say, what do you think about this? And I look at it from a very objective view, and I tell them exactly how I feel. And people, a lot of my, you know, fellow police chiefs, you know, they don't see it from certain angles. And I think being a black male that have been in those situations have sometimes a different view than, say, a white male who never experienced it before. And, you know, I've had many conversations, and I think, you know, it's all about getting in a room full of people and having a discussion. The more you talk about it, the more constructive it is, and you benefit. Now, you got the part about diversity in the force, or lack of.
Is there a lack of diversity?
I don't think so. I think we have a pretty decent balance here. You know, we have a lot of officers that I see here, more so than I saw when I was in Lauderdale, that actually grew up in the city. So, you know, they grew up here, you know, they're part of this community, and they have relatives here in this community. And, you know, I was like one of the few in Fort Lauderdale that actually had that. You know what I mean? There were very few of us that actually grew up in the city that actually worked on the Fort Lauderdale Police Department, that had, you know, a number of relatives and actually lived in the city. I think if you look at it percent-wise, more so here in West Palm Beach than I saw when I worked in Fort Lauderdale.
The other question is, what impact do the protests have on me personally and professionally? Well, first of all, I probably have not, thank God, have not had the same degree of interaction with the police that you have. But I have, as a black man, been sensitive to the fact when I'm driving down the street and if there are flashing blue and red lights coming up behind me, there's a certain element of stress that you have. And I had the conversation when I first started driving: keep both hands on the wheel. Yes, sir. No, sir. If you've got to reach for driver's license registration, let them know. I mean, and the uncle who taught me this, gave me that conversation, basically said, I don't want you to be an accident. And you know, that left a searing imprint in my mind. And I gave the same conversation to not only my son, but to my daughter. You know, because as a parent of black children, you don't want them to be an accident. You know, because I don't care whether it's accidental or intentional. If you've lost a child, there's no greater pain. So, but the demonstrations from a personal standpoint have resonated with me. I think I said recently, you know, when you see that video of the police officer kneeling on a man's neck for over 8 minutes, when folks around are saying, let him, you know, stop it, quit doing it, you got 3 other officers and no one's doing anything, it reminds me of the black and white newsreels that we would see of police dogs and fire hoses being turned on demonstrators, folks who wanted to get the right to vote. And once you have that image in your head, you can't unsee it. So from a personal standpoint, but the thing that I have also been quite amazed by is now the diversity of the protesters, of the demonstrators. You got as many white folks out there demonstrating. So this is no longer just a black community versus the police issue. I think something has happened where there's a broader audience now saying, you know, this really just isn't fair. If you got crowds, thousands of people in London, England, carrying Black Lives Matter, demonstrations in Japan, something is different here. And it is having some cultural implications. You know, NASCAR removing Confederate flag from part of their persona, not persona, makeup, banning them at their races. Hell, we got a black guy who's going to be on The Bachelor. So there's something happening in the cultural sense. But I do hope that it leads to broader action. And I think it's also just beyond police force and objecting to that. I think it is now elevating systemic racial injustice to the top of the conversation. Confederate statues are now being torn down. So that's how it's affected me personally. I said, this is something different. Now professionally, I still have to do my job. I still have a city to run, as I mentioned earlier. There's a balancing act that I have to go through to make sure that my citizens, my residents, my businesses, that they continue to be safe, while also giving these demonstrators an opportunity to express themselves. Next question.
All right, so next question, and by the way, let me just, so also add to that a little bit from my perspective.
Sure.
Or just say, I think not only nationally across the spectrum in the U.S., but globally, you know, I mean, everybody's always heard, okay, Black Lives Matter, or there's systemic racism, whatever. But in this case, 3 weeks ago, starting 3 weeks ago, the entire world got to watch, or was forced to watch, or had to watch for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, while one guy murdered, basically executed another man, with a lot of people standing around aiding and abetting him, and nobody helping, and he apparently, and the guy doing the murder for 8 minutes and 46 seconds intentionally, apparently thought that what he was doing was fine.
Okay.
You know, and there was no issue here. He had his hands in his pockets, it was no big deal. And when you watch that for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, a slow motion execution, over $20, maybe?
Oh, the charge?
Yeah. You, all of a sudden, I think everybody, it's something snapped and clicked, you know, for everybody, and it's a visual of this is real, and this is not okay. This is not okay. Shooting somebody in the back when they're trying to run away from you is not okay.
Right.
No, it's not okay. So, go ahead, Chief.
Yeah, so, you know, sometimes you look back on history, and, you know, one of the things we did back when we had a number of protests in Fort Lauderdale, we looked at Selma, Alabama. And, you know, if you look at that protest, I mean, Martin Luther King had a choice. They were definitely going to Alabama. They took away the voting rights of the blacks, and you know, that was one of the key things. How can we not participate in the voting process? I mean, you look at that now. I mean, this is kind of crazy. We're going to let this group of people can vote, but the black man can't vote. I mean, it's so bizarre in this current environment. But you know, that was the issues, and they couldn't ride on the bus, and a number of other things. But when Martin Luther King got there the first time, and they went across the bridge, and they stopped them. I mean, well, first of all, they picked Selma because the other two cities that they wanted to march from, they had a police chief that were kind of lenient towards the protesters. So he had to pick out of the three cities who was going to give them the most resistance. And they end up going to Selma because the chief there made a statement that he was going to stop the demonstrators and he was going to use force, and that's exactly what he did the first time around. And if you look at the people that were in that crowd, I mean, they were mostly black, African Americans. And the second time, when they tried to cross the bridge, when the police stood aside and was going to allow them to go across the bridge, they stopped. They stopped because it was totally unfamiliar to them. It wasn't one of these things where, like in our case, we want to make contact with the organizers. We want to let them know that we're going to do these things for them. But all of a sudden, they decided not to. Okay? Martin Luther King and the leaders of the group turned around. But if you look at the third group that came across, it was a large group of white Americans supporting the civil rights movement, and that third group was even larger than the first and the second group, okay? Because people realize what these issues are, okay? And not the local police, but the state troopers at the time, they basically created this peaceful environment for peaceful protest. And I think this is really where we are today. We have incidents like this that has caused an alarm in the country. We need to come together as a group of people and say, we need to work together to eliminate these type of incidents. And my thing here is, when we have peaceful protesters that come here, I haven't met one West Palm Beach police officer that told me that the officer was justified. Everyone agrees that this was unjustified. And I think the more people that feel the same way, that's how we're gonna get change here. And, you know, we have the discussions about, you know, the police unions and they have their police bill of rights. And that's a big piece here, okay? But they're not gonna protest. You're not gonna see the police unions protest. They're going to Tallahassee. That's where the rubber meets the road. And they have the legislation support, and they are able to get things done through the police bill of rights that, you know, the common person here who feels that they want to protest and they're going to get things done. I mean, every one of these protests, I walk with the protesters. I want to talk to them. I want to hear what they got to say. But when I see a large group of young people that tell me that they don't vote and their vote's not being counted, and I ask the question, why is that? And they say it's the electoral college that prevents my vote from being counted, and they cannot explain to you what that is. So, you know, it's just another example of misinformation, and people are reacting to something, and they don't have the information. Yeah, if you don't vote, you lose the electoral college and you lose the state, you know? So, and I think this kind of goes into the other question about the police versus the regular person. Go up a little bit.
Scroll up a little bit.
Saw the thing though.
Celicia. All right, Celicia, you're trying to compete with John here for the questions. Chief, why does it take so long to get the facts of a police officer versus the facts on a regular citizen? From an objective view, it does not seem so objective.
You're right, and you know, this is probably this is a good question, because a lot of people they look at these cases and they say, oh well, you know, this officer just shot someone, and the police department put them on administrative leave with pay. Okay, now this is a criminal investigation that's being conducted based on the police bill of rights and some contractual agreement between, you know, the city and the union. You have to be criminally charged. So once the
Chief, you keep mentioning the police bill of rights. Is that a state document? Is that a union?
you have the Florida Bill of Rights, and it's covered under 112.
112, okay.
Of the Florida statute.
All right.
And it kind of explains, you know, what those rights are. And part of the argument that the union constantly win is due process or lack thereof, okay? So when you say, oh, we're gonna criminally charge this person after they haven't completed an investigation, you know, all of a sudden, where was the due process? Oh, we're gonna terminate their employment when they haven't been criminally charged yet. You know, these are the things that police departments and cities have lost arbitrations in the state of Florida because they've taken away these officers' due process. I had 13 arbitrations in Fort Lauderdale. I lost 2, okay? I'm not here to lose arbitrations, you know? So if we get one of these situations where we feel that someone needs to be terminated, I don't want to lose this in an arbitration. If you lose this arbitration, not only do they come back, they get in a big check, and then they got an attitude that you can't even control because you can't even train them now. You're very limited as how you're going to deal with this person that should not be in this profession. So, you know, when you do the investigation, you need to do it thoroughly. And one of the questions that continues to come up with, and what I'm being asked, what happens here in West Palm Beach when we have one of these incidents? You know, I mean, you know, the state attorney has a choice. He can either immediately criminally charge the person, and start the process, or he could open a grand jury, okay? If you look at the Corey Jones case, that took almost a year to get that person criminally charged. They were able to terminate that officer's employment because he was a probation officer. But had he been a 5-6-year veteran, I mean, he would have probably waited at home for a year.
Getting paid.
Everyone's looking at the police chief saying, how do you allow this to happen when that is basically, if you take that right away from them, that could possibly be something that you can lose in an arbitration. So, I think probably what we need to do here is and I think it's kind of clear, it's sort of like the discussion on the Citizens Review Board. It's sort of like the discussion on what's going to happen when we have these incidents here. Don't wait till we have this incident here to say, oh my God, I can't believe, we have someone being paid sitting at home after they took someone's life and it doesn't look justifiable.
So you're saying the Police Bill of Rights limits the ability of the chief to take more decisive action sooner?
Yes, until the criminal process has begun when they're formally charged. Then we get into another.
So the real battle may be in Tallahassee.
Tallahassee, for sure.
To redefine, okay.
Or, if that's one of those things where, let's say, our state's attorney says, I just saw this video, I'm gonna charge him. If Dave Bernberg sees the video from Minnesota and says, I'm gonna send this to a grand jury, you're talking 12 months before this person is criminally charged. So everyone look in America, we're, the West Palm Beach, city of West Palm Beach, we got, we're on CNN now and Fox News and everybody's looking at us nationally, and they're looking at me saying, how come you're paying him, chief?
And then they're gonna look at me and say, how come you paying him, Mayor?
That's right. So, we're in,
Mayor, what's the deal with your chief?
Yeah.
Right.
When, I don't want to speak for the state attorney's office. I'm pretty sure they have a response to that, but I think that's where the rubber kind of meets the road. That ball doesn't start rolling until those criminal charges are filed.
Well, that's something that people need to understand.
Yes.
Sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, what else do we have?
Joe Verdone, are we going to make reviewed complaints and disciplinary action histories of officers available in a transparent, open format for the public to see and review easily? And I guess that also sort of goes to the question about, if a police officer is fired from one jurisdiction, he goes to another jurisdiction, applies, and they don't know his past history, then, how does that work in those things?
I think that that's a decision that police chiefs make when it's brought to their attention about that person passing. I'm gonna tell you right now, I've never did that before. If someone has, they were terminated from some other police department, and I don't know. I can't tell you I've ever hired anyone in that situation.
What information do you have? Do you have that information available from their other?
You gotta realize, every internal investigation, once it's complete, is a public record.
Okay.
I'm having a discussion the other day with a group of people here, residents here in the city, and they said, hey, listen, what about all of these officers that, they've been utilizing excessive force over the years, and when are we gonna take a look at them, and what are their names? They don't know the names. They just know it's happening. So I think what we need to do is, and I've made this pretty clear, every time I speak publicly, every time I engage a conversation with members of this community, my door is open. You want to come in, and you got an IA case that has been completed by our agency, and you want to have a discussion about it.
IAK, what is an IAK?
I'm sorry, Internal Affairs Investigation.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Get wrapped up in the police detail. But, an Internal Affairs Investigation where you felt someone was investigated by our agency and, you're not really clear or you don't agree with the outcome. we will meet with you. We can have these discussions. I welcome them. Yeah, I welcome them.
All right.
I've got a quick question, just,
Sure.
So let's talk about, so we've got the police officers, we've got the Bill of Rights, we got the city, we've got our citizens and all that. We're also hearing a lot about police unions, right? The unions who, I get it, they're there to defend the police and the police officers. In West Palm Beach, what's the relationship like with the police union, and the union representatives? Where do they come into play? What's the interaction like?
So far, last year, we've had a good relationship with them. I mean, we had several different discipline cases that I think that we didn't really agree with, but after they saw from our perspective and our thoughts on it, I mean, we had a couple battles, we won them. So, and you know, we're able to have these differences and have a professional relationship. But there's one thing here where it says the state attorney doesn't charge unless police arrest.
The state attorney does not charge unless the police arrest, which is done by the police chief. I understand your position about thorough investigation, but I'm grappling with why it is.
Why does it not take the same
time to thoroughly investigate and criminally charge John Doe? So in other words, why can you apparently criminally charge a citizen a lot faster than...
Well, you know what? I'm not going to respond to that question. I think you need to talk to our state attorney. Maybe he could clarify that to you, but it's not as simple as you think it is.
Okay. The Police Bill of Rights is a strong...
From Joe Verdone.
Yeah, from Joe Verdone. Police Bill of Rights is a strong example of exactly what the problem is. It creates a separate police class that establishes different standards for police that are completely different from the standards for the rest of us. And I guess that's a comment.
Well, it's pretty accurate. I mean, you got to read it. I mean, you know, it's not that the, you know, I get it. I get it. I think when you see police misconduct and it's blatant and, but we are not the group to criminal. We can arrest them. Yeah, we can fill out a probable cause affidavit. But let me tell you something. If the state attorney decides that they're not going to criminally charge someone, there's only one person in this county that determines if someone is going to be prosecuted. And it ain't the police chief. I can tell you that right now, but there's several of us here in Palm Beach County that don't have that authority. So whoever tells you that the police could just go out there and lock people up, nah, they can get those charges dropped immediately by the state attorney, and they say, we're not going to take your case, we're not going to prosecute that person. And I don't think, when you look at homicide cases here, I mean, I think their system here, you know, they're looking for a very thorough investigation, and they're not going to just say, oh, we just saw a video and we're going to lock them up. And would they do that with the case from Minnesota? I can't answer that question, but I mean, for what I've seen here is homicide cases, not even involving the police, you know, they're looking for a very thorough investigation.
And that's why it's important to have other actors at the table. I mean, someone from the state attorney's office who will be, by the way, be at our virtual town hall tomorrow, and even state legislatures, you know, to deal with the questions on the Police Bill of Rights, because that is something that ties the hands of the police chief and the mayor. I guess we're running out of time.
We're pretty much...
Okay, all right.
Anybody has any burning desires? We've got time for, well, one more, or just basically...
Well, let me just say in closing, thank you all for allowing us to be here. We're happy to come back anytime. I find this to be a useful platform because we could interact with the business community directly, answer any questions, and certainly get out to you our version of events so that there's no media filter. Not that I have anything against the media, but I think it's hopefully important to have that this interaction and this ability to just chat with one another. So thank you all for taking the time. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, Chief, thank you very much. I know, you know, in the business community and with most people, as we live in the city, go about our business day to day, just trying to, you know, get from one day to the next. You know, it's like you assume the water works, you assume that you're gonna go in and turn on the tap and that your toilet's gonna flush. You assume the lights are gonna come on when you flip the switch, and when they don't, you know, when things don't work, it gets your attention.
That's when I get the phone call, right?
That's when you get the phone calls, when trash doesn't get picked up. So this is a very integrally important part of our community. Really appreciate this opportunity.
So the one final note, I would ask each and every one of you to stay engaged in these issues. This is really an important time in not only our country's history, but our city's history. Stay engaged in whatever platform, whatever forum you think is appropriate, but we need to hear the voice of the business community. You know, often when you hear about these incidents, the business community is kind of over on the side. Now's not the time to be on the sidelines, ladies and gentlemen. This is your city. You need to be as engaged in these discussions in whatever way you feel comfortable as anybody else. So thank you again.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your week.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, truly appreciate it.